Good evening, and I would like to thank Avatar and the faculty for giving me an opportunity to speak on the current understanding and management strategies of cardiorenal syndrome. And I bring you greetings from Christian Medical College, Vellore. This is a brief outline of my talk. Going straight to the talk, cardiorenal syndrome is a failure of either the heart or the kidney, which can lead to or accelerate a failure of the other organ. A heterogeneous presentation with a significant high morbidity and mortality. The definition still remains to be a gray area, the reason being that two prerequisites have not met the concept of definition of cardiorenal syndrome. First, the precise definition of not able to combine cardiac and renal failure, and a mechanistic framework of the definition to be used in research. Hence, a clinical classification was designed, an order in which organs are affected and the time frame of their presentation is acute and chronic. The dilemma in the definition was the key dimensions involved in the interaction of the heart and the kidney were not addressed. The primary failing organ were not taken into consideration. The interaction was not unidirectional or bidirectional. The nature of the disease was not taken into consideration. And finally, the time involvement of the pathophysiological mechanism was not considered. Hence, the closest definition in early 2006 and 2010 did try their best to bring it in. However, it was quite difficult to be practiced in the clinical unit. Hence, Ronco in 2008 with his team brought out the classification of cardiorenal syndrome, the clinical variety, of two groups, cardiorenal and renocardiac, and dividing them further into acute and chronic based on the type of presentation. The type 5 was defined as a secondary to other systemic illnesses that predisposes to cardiorenal syndrome. The concerns in the clinical definition, they tried their best to define the clinical entities, but the practicing physicians, the nephrologists and cardiologists were difficult and not practiced it universally for simple reasons of use of terms of AKI and WRF, that is a worsening of renal failure, but not strictly defined as a common definition. The grading and the severity of the damage of the organ was not done. The clinical grading was not done, and the pathological processes were not mentioned so that a target-oriented medical therapy could be instituted. So the Acute Dialysis Quality Initiative and next group tried to look into these deficiencies and try to put in the primary disease process so that goal-directed therapies can be done. However, there were ambiguities in the definition, the admission of overlap of subtypes, and hence a more detailed definition were looked into of including clinical and pathophysiological. However, I feel this became a more complex definition. Though they divided it into 7 from 5. It can be useful in research, but coming into clinical practice to use this definition is quite difficult. But this is the current understanding that in cardiorenal syndrome, you take the organ that is initiating the process rather than the one that is involved. You try to compare with the other organ systems at the time of presentation so that a composite practical value for management can be done, and helps you in understanding the pathophysiology better so that you can come into a etiological classification. So the pathophysiology is more complex. The predominant role of the cardio and the renal connectors come into play of two connectors, that is the hemodynamic and the non-hemodynamic factors. They're quite complex, bidirectional, and they do have a maladaptive crosstalk. Having said that, there is no hierarchy of the two main connectors that have been proved in vitro and in experimental models. So looking at the hemodynamic factors, the traditional thoughts was that it's unable to generate a forward flow, resulting in a prerenal hyperperfusion, activation of this, leading to the activation of the RAS and the sympathetic nervous system and the arginine vasopressin system, resulting in fluid retention, increase in preload, and worsening of the pump failure, which results directly onto a renal failure process, further aggravating the heart failure. Now, this presence of a low flow state only partly explains the pathophysiology of cardiorenal syndrome. The simple reason that the worsening of the renal function was similar in people who had a preserved systolic function when compared with those of the reduced systolic function. The ADHERE registry brought out that, and they identified central venous pressure, elevated central venous pressure, and elevated intra-abdominal pressure, one of the few main causes, resulting in a renal venous hypertension, increase in renal resistance, and the rise in creatinine. Associated with the pre-glomerular vasoconstriction, the initial increase in the creatinine when the ACE or ARBs were added was identified as a pseudo-worsening renal function. This can become true when the reduction of the mean arterial pressure exceeds the renal autoregulatory mechanism. The right atrial pressure was the next to be identified, which was directly associated with a renal dysfunction. Then coming to the non-hemodynamic factors, the activation of the sympathetic nervous system, the persistent activation of the RAS system leading to a sodium water retention was identified the culprits. Research then brought out the role of the oxidative stress, the imbalance or the dysregulated nitric oxide production versus the reactive oxygen species, which causes fibrosis of the myocardium and disturbing distal tubular cells in the renal kidneys. There are emerging data of the crosstalk between the cardiac and the kidney dendritic cells, which are known to have a role in the innate and the adaptive immune responses. The role of inflammatory markers, which are direct cardiodepressant effects on the heart, leading to reduction in the left ventricular ejection fraction. Tumor necrosis factor alpha, along with IL-6, were known to cause myocardial renal fibrosis because of the accumulation of the inflammatory cells in the interstitium. IL-6 and tumor necrosis factor, which was more studied, has a close relationship and relation to the heart failure. They are markers for the progression of the disease, predicts the mortality, and these markers are quite elevated in CKD and dialysis. The role of CKD-associated toxins are very well known on uremic cardiomyopathy and left ventricular hypertrophy. But something that I like to highlight here is today the role of anemia. When it was associated, they thought there is a cardiorenal anemia syndrome because it contributed to frequent hospital admission, including death. So correction of anemia, was it good or bad? The beneficial effects that we saw in clinical practice was contrary to the findings of the 4 major trials that compared the improvement of hemoglobin with the use of erythropoietin and darbepoetin, telling us that there was no reduction in renal damage, no reduction in mortality of cardiovascular events. In fact, there was an increased risk of stroke and thrombotic events. Hence, the understanding then moved to improve the iron system in our body, which can directly improve the erythrocyte turnover, coming up with the KDIGO guidelines of use of IV iron to correct iron deficiencies at the earliest. There are limited studies of correction of iron with renal and cardiac outcome. The next was the endothelial dysfunction, which was related to cause ischemic-induced vasodilation. Atherosclerosis, proteinuria, muscle wasting, and cachexia secondary to the RAS system activation. Though they do not have a causal relationship, they are noted to have definitely an independent markers for vascular disease, independent risk factor for chronic disease and heart failure. Vitamin D deficiency, not least to mention, has been shown to have a prominent role in CKD. It has also been known to be closely associated with heart failure because of the regulatory effects on the blood pressure and parathyroid hormone. Hence, there has been a prominent role of correction of vitamin D deficiency as noted in the pathogenesis. So coming to a pictorial representation of the types of the cardiorenal syndrome, the type 1, when the acute heart failure comes in, the hemodynamic factors are set into play, which causes renal hyperperfusion resulting in acute kidney injury. Whereas in type 3, the renocardiac syndrome, when acute kidney injury happens, the hemodynamic factors along with the uremic toxins and the acidemia results in increasing the preload and the afterload, resulting in ischemic hypoptosis and necrosis of the myocardium, leading to an acute heart failure. This can be sustained and lead to chronic due to the role of the oxidative stress and the inflammation pathway that is under constant play. Coming to the chronic type, similarly that we see in the chronic heart failure, the activation of the neurohormonal system resulting in a renal perfusion sustained by causing this problem leads to necrosis and apoptosis, leading to chronic kidney disease. Whereas in type 4, when a chronic kidney disease set in, along with the development of a chronic influence of the uremia, electrolyte disturbances, acidemia, and the aberrant activation of the RAS, there is a decreased cardiac function, apoptosis, leading to chronic heart disease. Still, the cycle continues by the influence of the oxidative stress and the inflammatory pathways. Whereas the type 5 is very cause-related. You correct the cause or treat the cause, you can prevent the renal failure and the cardiac heart failure, which can set in due to the systemic involvement. Coming to the diagnosis of the cardiorenal syndrome, the role of biomarkers and the imaging and the volume and pressure monitoring that is coming to play. When it comes to the biomarkers, there are the conventional biomarkers, the old gold ones, but has limitation in clinical practice. The new novel ones, which are the new ones in the horizon, have their clinical relevance, potential therapeutic implications. My understanding is that we need to combine the new silver with the old gold to know what we can expect reasonably, what they will provide us today, and why their performance is still currently suboptimal despite our advancements in research. A very classical example is the troponin T is a very sensitive and a specific marker for a cardiac injury. We still do not have a very sensitive and a specific one for AKI. So putting both together, there's no single ideal marker. You need a panel of biomarkers to predict a cardiorenal syndrome is in the diagnosis. So markers for glomerular injury, cystatin C, albuminuria, creatinine have been known to be a prognostic indicator. When it comes to markers of tubular injury, the urine microscopy, the biological fluid, a liquid biopsy is what is called, gives you to the window into the kidney, has its negative predictive value on heart failure. The urine sediment, without even mentioning, has a significant prognostic value in prediction of the worsening of AKI during hospital administration. Novel markers coming into in tubular injury, NGAL has been approved for its use. A combination of TMP2 and IGF-BP7 has been told to have some role in the identifying markers of tubular injury. They correlate with the cardiac biomarkers. They are influenced by the baseline functioning renal tissue, but they can represent a transition to a chronicity in the renal system. The cardiac biomarkers, coming to them, those that depend on the kidney function are the predominant ones that are used, that is the proNBNP and the cardiac troponin I, which has been commonly used and reflect on the myocardial stress. The novel markers that do not depend on the renal function, the cardiac biomarkers that have been identified is the ST2 and the galectin-3. The imaging modalities are quite commonly that we use the echocardiography, but like to mention the role of speckle echocardiography and MRI in CKD. They are able to identify myocardial fibrosis and structural strain in the myocardium of those that present with type 4 cardiorenal syndrome. The pressure and the volume determination in cardiorenal syndrome, there are definitely significant research of use of all these modalities, but the data is lacking in literature, especially for the implantable hemodynamic monitoring devices and the use of the invasive hemodynamic monitoring cardiorenal syndrome. But the role of bioimpedance is coming up not only in dialysis population, but as well as its role in cardiorenal syndrome as well. When coming to the management, it's quite challenging. You can have features of pulmonary and systemic congestion associated with the kidney injury. It's not divided. It is not specific for a subtype. The reason is there is a close interrelation between the subtypes, and targeting one subtype can be beneficial for the other. So the management for type 1 and type 2 focuses on managing the acute and chronic heart failure. Type 3 focuses on managing the underlying cause of AKI. Type 4, it is a multifactorial management which is secondary to CKD. And type 5, you treat the cause that is causing the problem. The principles of management is very clear: decrease the volume load, improve the cardiac function, and improve the reduced injection fraction and manage CKD. So putting the management well together with the clinical application, decreasing the volume overload, use decongestion therapies, improve the cardiac function by using drugs that can target the neurohormone modulation, vasodilator therapies, the inotropic therapy, and certain other drugs that improve the ejection fraction, and that has come into role is the SGL2 receptors. The cardiac device therapy have been come into play, but data is lacking in them because of the complications that are involved in the procedure. So diuretics play the biggest role in decreasing volume overload. Expert opinions, not from RCTs. Having said that, there is no benefit noted in the short or long-term mortality and hospitalization. The primary class of drugs are loop diuretics. The second class of drugs are the thiazides that have been used. Which is better? Definitely torsemide is more effective because of the long duration of action and the predictable oral bioavailability. Is continuous infusion better or boluses? Continuous infusion, when compared to bolus, can give you a more sustained uniform drug delivery, prevents post-diuretic sodium retention. Having said that, there is an increased incidence of hyponatremia and high rate of rehospitalization and death at 6 months when continuous infusion have been practiced. Trials and literature mentioning about the efficiency, mortality, and renal injury and rehospitalization between the two modalities shows no difference between the two groups. There is a tendency to use the higher doses of diuretics for symptomatic improvement without compromising renal dysfunction. The combination regime of diuretics very commonly done in clinical practice. There is no, it has facilitated higher net fluid loss with improvement in creatinine, but no significant improvement in the outcomes. The simple reason why we have unfavorable outcomes, there is a lack of guidance for assessment of blood volume. We are unable to completely negate the deleterious effects of the RAS system. Hence, the only thing that we can do is to reinforce low sodium intake so that the blunting of the diuretic response is reduced as much as possible. And when we look into that, we need to understand and remember the concepts of diuretic resistance, diuretic braking phenomenon, and also the diuretic efficiency. So the consensus torsemide takes over the list. Intermittent is better than the continuous. And there has been a paradigm shift in the concept of management of moving from venous congestion rather than lack of forward flow. Ultrafiltration, the next modality, is class 2B that has been identified. No definite consensus of which is better. Both two trials that showed, one said was superior, the other said is inferior. That is because of the patient selection and the therapeutic algorithms which were used in each study. A brief mention, the UNLOAD trial, they said that the readmission in the diuretic arm could have reduced if there was a dose escalation of diuretics that was used. Whereas the CARIS HF trials, they had a very fixed continuous U of rates, which did not show significant outcome because the plasma refill was not assessed. Looking into these two, the AVOID HF trial took into these deficiencies. It had to be terminated because of the slow recruitment. Very high adverse events were noted in the UF group, and no significant trends were noted in the readmission group. So now it is said individualize the ultrafiltration so that the benefit can be seen. Improving the cardiac function of neurohormonal modulation, vasodilator therapy, and ionotherapy therapy, the drugs to be used are RAS, less likely to be used or withdrawn if there is a concurrent CKD involvement because the beneficial effects of morbidity is not reduced. The STOP AC trial will tell us about the role of AC inhibitors in the advanced CKD and its related cardiorenal outcomes. Mineralocorticoid antagonist has potential cardiorenal benefits. A combination combo that is used, that is along with AS and ARBs, have shown benefit in certain selected patients. Please remember the true burden of hypokalemia is not known in chronic CRS because these patients were excluded in the trials. The vasodilator therapy drugs, there have been multiple. There's long-term efficacy showing no reduction in the death or the composite cardiovascular deaths. Tolvaptan has been used, nesritride has been used, but no significant outcomes has been seen. The combination therapy of RAS and the vasodilator therapy has been showing some promising results to show lower renal dysfunction and hypokalemia, sole rate of reduction in GFR when compared to drugs that was only using RAS inhibition. Beta adrenergic blockers have been known to elevate the symptoms, reduce the hospitalization burden, but be careful, they have a tendency to develop low blood pressures and bradycardia due to a poorly tolerated with heart failure. And in cardiovascular disease, carvedilol is the drug of choice. Inotropic support has not been shown much of any difference, and cardiac resynchronization and cardiac device therapy, the 3 randomized controlled trials, have shown conflicting data with a higher rate of procedure-related complication. Survival is better in those with a GFR of more than 60 ml. The novel approach, the SGLT2, are the ones that are showing promising evidence with the reduction of heart failure incidence and renal protection, whereas the glucagon-like peptides and the dipeptidyl peptidase, the trials have shown more of non-cardio benefits rather than cardiovascular benefits, but trials are ongoing and we have to wait for these results. In non-diabetics, definitely yes, SGLT2 inhibitors have been known to have as outcome. So the evidence is very varying levels of evidence for goal-directed therapies with a relative paucity of data. When we look at the two scenarios, if we want to look in precision medicine, the first scenario that you can see is someone who comes with a non-ischemic cardiomyopathy with a fluctuating creatinine. You can diagnose with the kidney injury with biomarkers, adjust the treatment by use of diuretics. Whereas those with a chronic renal cardiac syndrome coming with a plans for a heart transplant, you need to rule out irreversible kidney damage with a renal biopsy, because if that is there, heart and kidney transplant is needed. So to conclude, my take-home messages: cardiorenal syndrome has a bidirectional relationship, practically not possible to specify who initiated the event. Precise clinical characterization and classification of cardiorenal syndrome has not yet been performed. The pathophysiology is multifactorial, complex, and dynamic. Remember, the non-hemodynamic factors are likely to be central role in the pathophysiology of cardiorenal syndrome. Diagnosis, biomarkers, you need a panel of them to be used. The medical treatment should focus on improving cardiac function, reducing the volume overload, and need to focus on managing the non-hemodynamic factors. So please continue to practice medicine wisely and honestly, and thank you for giving me this opportunity.